It's now time for part 3 of our survey of the Silent Hill 2 remake and the changes between the two versions. Up until now, we've covered the beginning of the game up through Brookhaven Hospital, where Maria gets ganked by Pyramid Head, and this time we're going to try to cover the similarities and differences up through Toluca Prison and the Labyrinth. In the original, these were my two least favorite areas of the game, since they seem to just be a major downgrade from the earlier zones, especially the Labyrinth. However, Silent Hill 2 Remake has overhauled these areas drastically. They still suck, but now it's because of the new types of enemies that make your life miserable, and not because the level design is lackluster. It sucks in the way that Marines and Navy SEALs reminisce about being in the thick of miserable circumstances and loving it. The prison sucks to deal with, but I love it. Picking back up where we left off, James makes his way out of the hospital and into the Otherworld version of South Vale. And most of this section plays out like it did in the original game, where you're really just trying to figure out where to go next while avoiding enemies and gathering supplies from the environment. As usual, the city feels like a real place now, and the atmosphere is on point. At some point, James sees Laura off in the distance and chases after her back to the east side of South Vale. The graffiti on the wall about the door waking into darkness is now fully visible, just like in the original. Not long after, you'll encounter a map in an RV, which you would have seen in the early part of the game that has a familiar note on it. It is, in fact, our letter and a wrench note from the original Silent Hill 2, also directing James to the next items needed to progress. However, instead of directing the player to Neely's bar, players will instead be directed to a payphone, which may confuse some players. You see, back in the before time, in the long ago, there were things called payphones, where you put in a quarter, possibly 2 quarters, in order to make a phone call on the street. This was before cell phones and indoor plumbing were invented. It was a savage time, but we survived and we were thankful for it. Speaking of Neely's bar, though, if you take a detour there, you'll find the familiar graffiti telling James in no uncertain terms that he's going to hell, and you'll find a fully marked up map, which is an Easter egg to the original Silent Hill 2's map of the same area at this point in the game. After going to the payphone and acquiring the letter and the wrench, it's off to Rosewater Park to find a particular statue where we find a key to the next area. However, upon arriving at the park, we're treated to a new cutscene between James and Angela. If it wasn't obvious yet that Angela is a survivor of CSA, then it's pretty obvious here. Once again, just a little extra scene that really drives home Angela's traumatic past and makes it feel more real. Not to say it wasn't apparent in the original, I just think her reaction here in response to James's innocuous statement is very well done. Anyway, after retrieving the key, it's off to the Historical Society, where you can read some more documents and lore about the town before descending the infamous staircase into the abyss. And, just like in the original, it takes about a full minute to descend the staircase, though I think this version takes slightly longer. Still, it's a nice touch with keeping the timing the same, just like in the first fight against Pyramid Head, where you can wait 2 minutes for the sirens to go off and win by default. Now it's time to deal with Toluca Prison. For comparison, here's the original map of this location. Pretty simple. It's literally one map for the entire location. This time, there are 6 maps. The prison is infinitely bigger than the original and far more deadly. There are a lot more puzzles too. Well, puzzles is probably an exaggeration. There is one overarching puzzle that covers the entire zone, which you'll need to solve bit by bit in order to unlock the various areas. First though, we jump down the various impossible shafts as we descend deeper and deeper into the prison. I say impossible since there's obviously no way these things would be part of any normal construction, let alone James surviving these jumps into darkness without shoving his shins into his knees. I mean, remember in The Dark Knight when Batman dropped Sal Maroni from the second story or whatever?
I want the Joker.
From one professional to another. If you're trying to scare somebody, pick a better spot. From this height, the fall wouldn't kill me.
I'm counting on it.
Huh.
Listen to that crunch. Of course, Batman also jumps down and doesn't get injured, but that's because he's Batman. Obviously. James is not Batman. Batman is far smarter and would never have fallen for Laura's trick in the hospital. Just saying. After dropping down and solving some of the same puzzles as the original, James makes his way into the cafeteria where he meets Eddie once again. Eddie is truly terrifying in Silent Hill 2 Remake. Not saying he wasn't crazy in the original, but he just comes across as much darker and more unhinged. He's a man who has been pushed beyond his breaking point and has a degree of sadism to him that feels much more obvious this time around. The dead behind the eyes look really elevates his scenes too. As for the prison itself, the main cell block feels much more threatening and oppressive considering how much darker it is this time. There's also a new type of mannequin that climbs the walls scattered throughout the prison that will jump you from above, so have fun with that. That's really the monster that makes the prison more difficult. They were already sort of annoying to begin with, but being dive-bombed out of nowhere gets sort of annoying after a while, as I'm sure you could guess. The main courtyard has our main puzzle as expected, but things have changed. Instead of bringing the 3 tablets out, there's now the Hangman's puzzle, which, if I recall correctly, was originally in the Labyrinth. It's been moved out here and works slightly differently, though the main premise is the same. However, before doing that, you'll be running around collecting various weights. These are used out in the courtyard where there is a set of scales. Putting the weight on the scales shifts the arrow to a different animal. Each of these animals is connected to a specific doorway which will open once the pointer lands on them. The ultimate goal here is to have the scales perfectly balanced, a reference to the impartiality of the scales of justice. Until then, you'll be working your way through the various rooms and avoiding or fighting a lot of monsters, mostly mannequins that enjoy crawling up the walls. Man, I hate these things. The other thing I hate is the tried and true and predictable pattern of knowing that when you acquire a key item or throw a switch that you know is going to open up a new path or let you get the aforementioned collectible, enemies just start flooding out of the woodwork to make you fight and waste ammo getting out. As if there aren't enough enemies in the prison already, there are at least 2 sections that basically trigger this survive waves of enemy mechanic. Again, when you start seeing lots of ammo and restorative items and a lot of dead enemies on the ground that you know you didn't kill, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. Granted, if you've been conservative with your ammo, it's not as though these sections are all that difficult. Well, the shower room isn't. The cell block with the spider monkey mannequins is just annoying. Anyway, once you finish navigating all the various zones within the prison, which again I think was a vast improvement of this zone over the original because it was now actually fun, you'll have all the requisite weights to balance the scales. Doing so provides James with a plank of wood that is used in the center of the courtyard to throw a switch which drops multiple nooses and opens up the central puzzle. Here, you have to piece together the narrative of the various criminals and figure out which of the accused was actually innocent. It changes each playthrough, so you can't just memorize the solution. You actually have to get at least 2 of your brain cells to fire. Choosing the wrong answer drops you into a room where you'll need to climb a ladder to get back out and go try again, so nothing terribly inconvenient. Not like it's dropping you to your death or anything. Choosing correctly drops you down into what is essentially a morgue, followed by another series of deep shafts, which brings us to the Labyrinth. As I stated at the beginning, the Labyrinth in the original Silent Hill 2 was probably the most uninteresting part of the game. It just felt like something I had to get through to get back to the good zones in the game. Boy oh boy has that changed. Not only has the zone been expanded, as the other zones in the game have been, but the biggest change is the boss fight with Abstract Daddy. In the original, the order of events is reversed. In OG Silent Hill 2, the first major event after entering the Labyrinth is meeting Maria again. Obviously, the scene rife with the most tension between the two of them. Afterwards, as James tries to find a way to get to her, he comes across a room where he hears Angela yelling, "No, Daddy, please don't," which I don't think has anything to do with putting batteries in a Furby, setting it off, and then locking her in a room with the lights off. In Silent Hill 2 Remake, the fight is pretty much the first thing you encounter, and the setup for it is much more visceral. I did see some people complain that somehow this ruins this part of the game by having James do this before meeting Maria, but I really don't see how. This one commenter points out that they felt it was weird for James to deal with that and then deal with Maria acting all seductive, but again, I'll save my thoughts on this for the character-specific videos. In any case, you still find the newspaper clippings about a murder involving Angela's father, but now you hear Angela's own terror, and as you progress through the fight, you hear audio from her father yelling and being an overall cretin. You even find an alcove with a teddy bear, which is obviously supposed to represent a hiding place for Angela when she was a young girl. Overall, the fight is much more gut-wrenching, and as you progress deeper, you come through the zone with pistons and breathing walls. Now, when I played this, there had been a patch which stopped the walls from breathing, but patch 1.06 fixed this. I don't have any footage recorded on my own, but I was able to find some post-patch that I'm using here. The audio remains the same, and there are moving pistons up above you, but the ones in the walls don't move, unlike in the arena from the original. Now, I don't quite know what to make of this. In the original, while you piece together what had happened to Angela in part, the room you confront Abstract Daddy in makes it a bit more obvious with the moving pistons in the walls. In the remake, I think we fully know by this point exactly what it was. And the breathing walls, the sounds in the area, the pistons above you are all clearly symbolic of what happened to her. I seem to recall that the patch that stopped the walls from breathing back and forth as though it was movement under the bed sheets was not exactly intentional, but may have broken due to another fix. They obviously put it back in later. I don't recall the pistons in the walls moving though. Perhaps they figured that having those move too was overkill since everything else is pretty obvious. The set design and the zone design is much more overt here than in the original, though it's not like either one left her abuse as a mystery. I think both serve their purpose. Anyway, after the fight, there is the same breakdown Angela has and the same accusations she hurls at James before going off on her own once more. Not long after the fight, James meets with Maria again, just like in the original. There are some minor dialogue changes here, but I'll save that for my character analysis series, assuming I don't slack off on those again. Anyway, as James progresses through the labyrinth, he'll revisit this cube of faces, which was used in the original to gain access to where Mary was. Now, it allows James to rotate a structure which opens up one of 3 routes through the labyrinth. Again, the zone has been massively overhauled compared to the original, and each branch feels unique compared to the others. Also, just like in the original, the map is hand-drawn by James. Some of the area is the same as the original. There's still the section that looks like a normal set of hallways and doors with ladders going down into a sort of cavern-like area. Completing the third and final area will bring you to a hallway with another encounter with Pyramid Head, and after defeating him, the hallway will clear up and you'll be able to enter the room with Maria, and surprise, surprise, she's dead this time too. What a shock to nobody who has played the original. What is different is that in order to progress, you need to drag Pyramid Head's great knife down the previously inaccessible hallway that was sealed off by a doorway with what looks like a bunch of arms or legs or something. Kind of hard to tell, honestly. These work the same way that the previous boss fight with PH worked. As the knife gets closer, the arms retract. However, unlike in the original, you don't get to keep the great knife as a weapon. It may or may not let James try to swing it, I honestly don't remember. Either way, it's an interesting bit of visual storytelling about James and Pyramid Head that is subtle enough for new players and obvious for older ones. Getting to the end of the hallway takes you to the graveyard where you still find names of all the characters written on tombstones, and, just like in the original, the way forward is to jump down the grave with James's name on it. After another impossible shaft, we come to the boss fight with Eddie, who has now gone full psychopath on us. After a brief dialogue exchange, the fight begins, this time beginning and ending in the meat locker. There are also several dead bodies in the room where you meet Eddie that look suspiciously like James. Again, another hint at the loop theory, possibly. The fight with Eddie is much more intense this time and comes in 2 phases. In the second phase, not only does the room get foggier, but the meat hooks start moving around as well. Eddie will either shoot from a distance or come up closer to perform a melee attack. And just like in the original, the rifle does a great deal of damage, but Eddie isn't terribly easy to find either. It could get frustrating at times taking a shot only to get blocked by a slab of meat, but in the end, James is victorious over Eddie and leaves the meat factory to emerge at the pier, where he will then row across the lake to meet Mary at their favorite spot. Or so he thinks. As before, there are a few Easter eggs in these zones. I already mentioned the first one at Neely's bar. In the prison, you'll find the original tablets, such as the Gluttonous Pig, the Oppressor, and the Seductress in their original locations, though they aren't used in this version. You'll also find the original location of the horseshoe and wax combination you had to use in the OG version to open a trap door, and in the Labyrinth, you can find the original location of the Hangman puzzle, which was relocated to the prison area earlier. Alright, that's going to cover it for this one. Overall, I really like the changes to the prison and Labyrinth, although I do think the volume of enemies and the survive waves of enemies bits could have been curtailed. The prison specifically felt like it was maybe a little longer than it needed to be. I think even if they had trimmed it by maybe a third, it would have been better, but overall, I was pleased with it. Next video will be the last in the series, and we'll cover the Lakeview Hotel as our final spot. The endings will be covered in a separate video when dealing with James's character specifically. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed taking this brief tour through the changes in this part of Silent Hill 2 Remake, and I'll see you in the next one for the final installment.